I layer the bottom of the tank with wood chips and give the enclosure a few squirts with the water mister for good measure. I take a step back to admire my handiwork, then return to adjust the angle of a carefully positioned branch. Carefully positioned to look as natural as possible, of course. I flick the switch beside the tank, and both the UV heat lamps start to glow. They'll have the tank at the optimum temperature in about 10 minutes or so, I'd say. I tap a little button on my headset, and it connects back to HQ. I say HQ like it's some big dramatic location. It's an office about 5 minutes walk away from the reptile house, staffed at this moment in time by a single dude. But still, it's still our HQ. "Hey Mateo," I say into the mic, and after a crackle he replies,
"Hey Kenny, what's up dude?"
"The tank for our latest guest is complete."
"What, the gator?"
"Gator? No, dude, for the frilled snake."
"Oh, right. Yeah, sweet. I think they're planning on moving it tomorrow."
"Tomorrow? Why? It can go in right now. The enclosure is done, man."
"Well, it's just you and me here tonight, bro. So if you want, you can come and get the snake yourself."
"Sure, I'm on my way."
"Aight."
I click the mic off. I take a step back and look around. The air is thick and warm, and despite it being a cold and windy night beyond the walls, the atmosphere in the reptile house is decidedly tropical. This section of the building is below ground, meaning it's a hell of a lot larger on the inside than it looks on the outside. We have a section open to the public. They can come and visit, stop at the cafe, buy stuff at the gift shop, and see the reptiles. The stuff you'd expect to do and see. Tree frogs, lizards, snakes, and turtles. We even have some alligators. But we're different to most other places. The majority of our inhabitants are not visible to the public, and for good reason. Because here, we take care of the reptiles that, to be honest with you, all things considered, probably shouldn't exist. They're kept here, supposedly, temporarily. A stopping point before they're moved to some cryptozoology lab somewhere for proper study and analysis. That's the theory. But in practice, these places are majorly underfunded. Some of our reptiles stay with us for years, or more. Some never get requested, some get sent back, and so it's become a sanctuary of sorts. A reptile sanctuary. Or at least that's how I try to make it when I'm feeling optimistic. I often feel like a background character, to be honest with you. Someone not worth bothering about. Someone off-screen. And it gets me down sometimes. But I take pleasure and pride in my job. I do my best to create environments and habitats that these creatures will feel happy in. This is my purpose, my place. This is where I belong, I guess, for several reasons. And I try to stay positive, even when I sometimes find myself doing a late night shift in a lonely, subterranean rainforest. It's busier than this normally, I swear. I lean back with a sigh, twisting my waist and stretching my back, stifling a yawn as I do so. It really is late. I'll get the snake moved in, do my round of feedings, and then it should be time for me to clock out. And if not, Mateo won't mind if I go home a bit early. I peer through the plexiglass walls of the Tarrasque tank. Though I can't see it right now, despite its size, the enclosure is large, and there are plenty of places for it to hide. Reptiles are notoriously prone to hiding when they don't want to be seen, and they're good at it too. It's a dangerous creature though, the Tarrasque. Makes me uneasy when I can't see it. But I don't have all night, so I turn and begin to make my steady way back through the complex, passing between green, leafy trees and tanks built into bamboo stalk style walls. I pass by the homes of several of our inhabitants, some of which have been with us a long time, most of which I built and designed myself, I might add. I pause to look into some of the tanks along the way. I never tire of these reptiles, of any reptiles really. I think they're fascinating. The tank to my left is small and half filled with water. There's an elevated platform covered in dust and another with little leaves. The tank has 3 inhabitants. They're frogs, covered in thick, white-gray fur. The throat of the closest one swells as I fondly observe. Their croaks sound like musical notes, some deep, some higher pitched. Beside this enclosure resides our Ouroboros, The tank of the Ouroboros is square, and in the center is the snake in question, a long, scaled circle. Its eyes flicker briefly over to mine as it eats its tail, slowly but surely swallowing itself, digesting its own body at such a speed as to regrow as it moves. Around it goes, around and around and around, forever presumably. We've had this guy for 7 months straight now, and it's shown no sign of stopping. I give it a little salute and carry on along my way. I cross over a short wooden bridge, my feet clanking on the wood as a low waterfall rushes and splashes off to my right. There are more tanks on this side, nestled amongst the leaves. This one here is at eye level, and I peer in. This is the tank for the mo'o, fascinating little lizards, like geckos, though with slightly larger heads and feet. I tried to recreate its native Hawaiian home in there, and I think I did a pretty good job. There are several of the lizards visible right now, some on the plants, some scuttling through the sand and the water. I tap gently on the glass, and the closest one reacts. It turns to me at once and raises its tail, the water beside it rippling softly, evaporating into mist right before my eyes. The mo'o backs up a few paces, rattling its tail, and the mist falls as rain from the top of the tank splashes onto the sand and back into the water. Some of it lands on another of the mo'o, and it stretches out, enjoying the feel of the water on its skin. When the mo'o die, they return to the landscape, which I think is particularly fascinating. They don't live long lives. One of these guys died recently by the looks of it. They're tough to spot, the dead ones, but there he is, just off to the side. The majority of his body has crystallized into a rock-like solution, though leaves and tiny vines now sprout from what once was his back left leg. At a glance, you would think him just a part of his surroundings. I think it's awesome. A perfect return to nature. I carry on along my way, reaching into my pocket for the key that will unlock the door to the freezer. As I said before, I just need to do some feeding and I'll be wrapping up for the night. I used to do this part with my girlfriend, the feeding, so it's a melancholy experience these days. I still enjoy it, but I miss her. The relationship effectively ended about 4 months ago. I've been doing okay since then, I guess. Work keeps me busy. I shiver as I step into the freezer, my breath clouding and my body unimpressed with the sudden change in climates. I grab the wheelbarrow and roll it back and forth a little to loosen the frost from the wheel, then push through the freezer and into the room beyond, the place we keep the meat to be de-thawed for an evening feed. Reptiles don't need to be fed particularly often. Most of the ones we keep here get by with 1 feeding a week, or less in some cases. There are snakes here that we only need to provide food for once a month. I load the barrow up and make sure I close all the doors behind me as I return to the humidity of the complex, moving relatively quickly before the sweat can freeze on my skin. I shut the freezer door behind me, and with a grunt, raise the bars of the wheelbarrow and set off. The wheel clattering against the wood and tile of the bridges and the floors. On my way around, I pass by the basilisk tank. The glass is made with a particular reflective surface that reduces the effect of the basilisk's notorious glare. The one we have in here is only a little thing, 4 feet or so. There's supposedly no limit to how big they can grow though, dependent on environment, climate, food, and all that kind of stuff. I grab the tongs we keep to the side and pluck a dead rat from the wheelbarrow, lowering it down into the cage and simulating movement, making it seem like the rat is snuffling around the basilisk's home, nudging aside the wood chips. And from the shadows of the cave that I built for the creature myself, out slithers the basilisk. It doesn't bother with speed. That isn't its tactic. It slithers out and raises its head, staring down into the rat's face and emitting a long, low hiss. It's a gorgeous looking thing, this creature, golden skinned and flecked with scales of caramel, with bright and staring yellow eyes. There's a pattern in those eyes that is ever changing. It ripples with a subtle and soft orange fire, dancing behind the pupils. The one we have here was born from the surprise egg of a rooster in central Colombia, and the snake has what might pass, at first glance, as a rooster-like crest along the slope of its head. The basilisk draws steadily closer, keeping its eyes ever fixed on the rat. I stop moving the lifeless creature around, holding it in place and simulating the effects of the basilisk's paralysis. The effect of the basilisk's stare is to lock the joints of its victim's body, sending signals, transmitted through vision, to the poor prey's brain, tricking it into freeing up its host's muscles. The basilisk then moves in for the kill, neck first if the victim is lucky. Otherwise, they simply have to endure until the basilisk is satisfied. A moment or two more, and the basilisk takes the bait, lunging down for the rat's head and wrapping its body with surprising speed around its limbs. A backup measure, I should think, in the event that the creature is not fully frozen. I release the rat from the tongs and draw them back out of the tank, carefully sliding the lid closed and leaving the creature to enjoy its meal. But not before its closest eye swivels round to stare at me, at this human that came with its meal. My eyes meet the basilisk's, and I feel a sudden shiver run down my spine as my brain responds to the snake's signals. The hand with the tongs start to stiffen and twitch, and I drop the apparatus to the ground with a clatter. But it's okay. This happens sometimes. I force myself to blink and to turn away, stretching my fingers and massaging my palm before crouching down to retrieve the tongs. I have pins and needles for now, but my hand will be fine after a minute or two. I continue on my route through the reptile house. The hiss of the filters are particularly irregular this evening. They fade in and out at various intervals, merging with a gentle rush of the waterfalls and pumped streams, and forming a part of the secret atmosphere, along with the tropical rainforest sounds we play on a loop through the speakers. I wheel the barrow over one of our longest bridges, one that connects to another halfway across, and built upon poles above a relatively large, sandy pit beneath us. It isn't just sand. There are heat bars and large sections of water, and a few appropriate plants as well. The creatures down there are by far my least favorite. They terrify and disgust me. And that's saying something, because as I said, I love reptiles. I'd rather not go into detail about these ones, if that's okay. I just grit my teeth and mentally switch off, getting done what needs to be done. I grab 2 large chunks of reddish, miscellaneous meat from the wheelbarrow, and with a grunt of effort, I fling them both over the side of the bridge, one to my left and one to my right. One slab lands with a thud in the sand, with a little cloud of dust, the other in the water with a splash. 2 of the creatures below jump suddenly into action. One moment they are as still as statues resting amongst the rocks, and the next they are scuttling over the sand on their hands and feet, snarling and roaring those quiet, back-of-the-throat, crocodilian roars at each other, tearing into the meat that has fallen onto the sand. The smaller of the 2 quickly gives up, scampering towards the water and sliding beneath, gliding its way to the delicious meat that slowly sinks nearby. The third of the reptiles that are kept below does not move. She does not go after the food. She simply remains in its place, crouched on one of the rocks. She stares at me, her fingers splayed out for balance, the skin beneath her chin pulsing in and out. But other than that, there are no signs of movement. The eyes, unblinking, bore into mine. This is no basilisk, but its gaze is far harder to turn from. Turn I do, though, and I carry on through the complex. 2 more stops to go. It's a fair trek to my penultimate stop. At the very, very far end of the complex, there is a door that leads to a metal railing, and this railing forms part of a walkway, high up above a large, deep pool. I push through and roll the wheelbarrow across the metal, the platform rattling as I cross to the halfway point. I set the barrow down and put my hands on the rail, looking down at the softly shimmering water below. I can't see the pool's occupant very well tonight, only a faint shadow in the depths. I grab the final piece of significant meat from the wheelbarrow, the heaviest by far, and I haul it over to the edge. It hits the water with a loud splash, and I watch as the shadow beneath it becomes larger and larger, drawing up to the surface with a keen hunger, and then grabs the slab of meat and drags it back down to the deep. It turns and swims back down, barely breaking the surface as it does so, and I cannot help a little disappointment. I catch only the briefest glimpse of one of her silverback, rigid tails, flicking out with a frothy splash before descending back down with the rest of her. Ah well, I can always rely on my final stop to be a friendly one. Back within the warmth and tropical humidity of the complex, deep in the middle of the enclosures is a small, low-walled enclosure that I built myself for a tortoise I've named Inky. I feed Inky with lettuce from my hand, and he munches happily as he chews and swallows it down. To be honest, I'm not convinced that Inky is even supposed to be here with us. He's warm-blooded, which is quite interesting for a reptile. But other than that, he's basically just a normal tortoise. His shell is white and his scales are dark gray, but he behaves just as any other tortoise would. We actually had to fit a modified AC unit into his cave so that he can cool down if needed. He has a shallow little pool also that he sometimes sits in. "You're a good boy, aren't you, Inky?" "Yeah," I murmur as he eats his food. I scratch his head lightly, which I think he likes. He continues to munch, and the hissing of the filters grows just a little louder. Just a little closer. And then, to my surprise, Inky does something rather atypical. He stops eating. There's still food in my hand, but he does not take it. He just stops. I watch with curiosity as he steadily retreats, backing up a couple of cautious steps, and then he heads into his cave. "Inky, you okay, bro?" I ask as he draws in his head, hiding himself in his shell in the shadows. And as he does so, a sense of creeping, gnawing dread begins to seep into my constitution. I am struck by a couple of urges in quick succession. 1, to turn around. 2, to run, though I am careful to do neither. Instead, I slowly rise to my feet, heart now pounding, walking calmly and coolly around the edge of Inky's enclosure till I'm standing on the opposite side. Then, with my vision fixed on the ground, I carefully turn to check my surroundings. My pulse races. What am I going to see? Is something stalking me through the complex? Blood pounds in my ears as I look from place to place, wincing as I check every new location. But I see nothing. The fear remains, but I cannot see the threat. I slowly raise a hand to tap the button on my headset. "Mateo?" I mutter. No response. He's probably fallen asleep or gone for a piss. "Mateo!" But my colleague does not respond. I check my surroundings again. Inky is just below me. The Tarrasque enclosure is just off to my right. I pause. I have not yet seen the Tarrasque tonight. We only have the one, but he is an expert at hiding, despite his size. I head to the plexiglass of his enormous tank, studying it carefully. I'll give it a quick look over, no more than a minute or so, then I'm going to get the hell out of here. Less than ideal to have the reptile loose in the complex, but I'm also not planning on risking my life here. I see a reflection of my scared face in the glass, and I shift the focus of my gaze so that I'm peering into the shadows beyond. The Tarrasque is the size of a small lion. He is a horrifying looking thing, and one of the most frightening we keep here at the complex. I'd rank him perhaps just a little lower than the things beneath the bridge. The Tarrasque is more animalistic though, and that makes him both more and paradoxically less predictable. It's tough to explain. He has 6 reptilian legs, and like our other inhabitants, is covered in scales. He is dark green and black, a living shadow in the rainforest, and his head, his face. The Tarrasque's head is too large for his body. Its face resembles a cross between a man and a lizard, with the proportions and dimensions of a great, hungry frog. Its teeth are, for the most part, square and regular, and when it grins, the teeth stretch disturbingly from one side of its face to the other. The teeth are the giveaway. That's how you find it. The hissing of the filters come to a sudden stop, and it's then, in that momentary silence, that I see that white, widespread grin through the leaves and the shadows. My heart, for a second, stops in my chest. Above the grin are the eyes, wide and orange, with the tiniest, most focused little pinpricks of pupils in their very centers. How the hell did it get out? Is the first question that comes to mind. But I suppose it doesn't matter. Not in this moment anyway. The second question is, what the hell am I going to do? I take a retreating step. The grin of the Tarrasque stretches just a little wider. I retreat a little more, putting as much space as I can between myself and the beast. I do not look directly into its eyes. I look at its feet, an attempt to be non-threatening, non-prey-like. Back I go, through the leaves of the canopy, heart hammering. Stay cool, Kenny, stay cool. I shoot a quick, risky glance over to a door on my left. It has a series of thin plastic strips across it to help keep the heat in. It leads into another section of the complex, one in which there are labs I can lock myself in as a defensive measure. Beyond those doors is also an exit, one that leads through the leaves and back to the main office that separates this secret complex to the reptile house, the one that's open to the public. I look back to the Tarrasque and realize to my dismay that it has gone. The sound of thudding, pounding feet starts getting louder and louder, the sound of a heavy tail dragging against the tile. I cannot work out where it is coming from. A scream catches in my throat and I break, running from the scene and tearing through the doorway and into the next room, running as fast as my legs will carry me. I stumble as I race over one of the bridges, fearful for a moment that I will fall, but I regain my balance and carry on along my way towards the exit. I pass by the basilisk. As with before, its shimmering yellow eye meets mine through the glass, and I feel the slight stiffening begin to take hold in my legs. "Oh no!" I shout out loud as I trip and crash into a tropical tree, wincing as I try to desperately massage the flow back into my joints. I quickly look back up the way that I came. I cannot see it, but I can hear it, which of course is far worse in the current standing. I shoot terrified looks all around me, but I just cannot tell where the thing is coming from. I stagger to my feet and hobble to the nearest door. I swear I feel the warmth of an impending presence right behind me, but when I swivel to stare in horror at the creature behind me, there is nothing there. I swear and slam my way through to the corridor that links the complex to the office, drawing it closed with a heavy slam and initiating the locking sequence, tumbling my way back to the main desk to find Mateo eating a packet of chips, watching some dumb movie on the screen. "Mateo!" I shout, and aware of my presence for the first time, he almost jumps out of his skin. "Kenny, what the hell, dude? You here for the snake? Why'd you sneak up on me like that?" "Sneak up on you? Didn't you hear all the doors slamming? Why the hell didn't you respond when I called you through the headset?" "Ah, damn, man, my bad. I forgot to turn it back on." Mateo reaches up to his ear and returns his headset to life with a small beep. I sigh and collapse into a seat, doing my best not to hyperventilate. Mateo regards me. "You good, man?" "No, not really. The Tarrasque is out." "The what?" he replies in panic, jumping out of his seat and spilling his chips all over the floor. "No, for real?" I nod. "For real? Like, actually?" "Yes." He swears under his breath and grabs up the emergency phone. He'll be calling the specialists in, though they won't be here until the morning. I pass on what I know as the phone rings, then sit back and try to calm down a little as he passes the info on to the people onto the line. He's actually back in work mode. He's scanning the screens and relaying times and information and such. I give it a few more minutes, then I stand up with a sigh and clap him on the back, heading into one of the office rooms to log the incident. As I do so, I pass by the frilled snake, our newcomer. I wipe some of the sweat from my forehead as I pause to admire it. It's rainbow colored, the light refracting in its frills to create a prism effect on the walls of its tank. "Sorry, friend," I say after a moment. "You'll have to wait a little while before you get to try out your new home. Hang tight." The incident log is a book kept near the back of one of the lesser used rooms. There are lockers in here, diagrams of unusual reptiles, and a window that looks into the complex. The secret complex, that is. I make a mental note to lock this door behind me, and to double check the others before I leave this evening, just in case. I opened up the book and flipped to the latest page, struggling to get the face of the Tarrasque out of my mind. The Tarrasque is a particularly interesting one. It's gotten out of its enclosure 3 times before, over the course of its 4 years with us here. We keep trying to fast track it to a more secure location, but for some reason, nobody wants to house it. I grab the pen and find the latest space for an entry. It is possible that nobody left the enclosure door open. There is a chance that the creature has learned how to do it himself. I guess we'll just be adding more security then. More expensive and costly measures to keep it contained. Necessary, of course, but still. Let me tell you a little bit more about the Tarrasque. The Tarrasque possesses something unlike anything else that we have amongst our inhabitants here, and that is its bite. The Tarrasque finds its target, it tears off the limbs of its prey, feasting happily on the delicious flesh, and in the moment of its bite, its saliva pours into the victim's blood and is able to actually alter their DNA. It's slow at first, but it quickly picks up speed, and over the course of a day or two, the prey rapidly loses much of its former cognitive function. It loses fur and hair, and develops just enough reptilian properties to allow it to regrow its limbs. And these are limbs which need regenerating, as the Tarrasque, of course, has recently torn them brutally off. The Tarrasque then keeps tabs on its prey, allowing it to escape but watching patiently, stalking it, careful to see where it might go. And once those delicious limbs have fully regrown, well, then it's time for its next meal. And so the cycle continues, over and over, until the creature that the Tarrasque so cruelly targeted is able to make a permanent escape or is eaten greedily beyond repair. I read through the last 3 incidents in the log. 2 weeks ago, Angela sprained foot on Bridge 4 by the water tanks. First aid applied in office. 1 month ago, Mateo bitten by winged frog. Treatment and antidote applied within first hour. And 4 months ago, Asha bitten by Tarrasque. Treatment applied to no effect. DNA alteration sequence commenced. I rub a hand across my forehead and add the new incident to the log in shaking fingers. I really did love Asha a great deal. She was my first, and to date, only girlfriend. Why do we keep such a terrifying monster as the Tarrasque in here at all, you might ask? The answer is simple. Without it, we have no hope for an antidote. But until we find an organization willing to try some experiments, then here it will remain. And I will do my job, over and over, around and around, like the Ouroboros. This is where I belong, here, in the reptile house.